Oh, yeah, keep me. Ready to start? Good evening, everyone, both in person and online. Welcome to week 6 of term 1 of Thursday evening Rongton Buddhist Training College philosophy classes. Rinpoche is currently in Victoria, helping to host the visit of His Holiness the 43rd Sakya Trizin, who's currently at our retreat centre, Siba, in Victoria, East Gippsland. And next week, he'll be back here. However, with His Holiness's activities, we won't be holding a class next week. However, Rinpoche has allowed me to lead this class, so I'll be continuing on from where he left off last week. So we'll begin with the usual prayers before teachings, and we'll get into things from there. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By the virtue of listening to this teaching and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By the virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far, according to the intelligence and predisposition of each being. We ask that you turn the Dharma will of great love and common vehicle. So this text, Buton's History of Buddhism, was written in the 14th century by Buton. There's a translation that is a pioneering translation and is probably worth a look at. You can look at it for free on the Internet Archive site, which is archive.org. And it's translated by Obermiller, but it's a good 95 years old, so it has some sort of outdated phrases and so forth, like it translates the word Sangha as church. So Rinpoche found it quite difficult to try and teach from this text, and having had a look at it myself, I found the same. However, I did find a few weeks ago online that there's a more recent translation that was only published in 2013 by Snowlion, which is a publisher in America of Tibetan Buddhist literature. And it's translated by two Westerners, one named Lisa Stein, Stein, and another Westerner who uses his Tibetan name, Nawang Zampo. So it seems to be a good translation. It's available, if you're in Australia, it's available from the Australian online bookstore called Booktopia. It has a paperback version, which is about $50 or $60. And then it has what's called an e-textbook version, which is the one I got, which is only about $30, $35, I think. And it, as an e-textbook, you can only access it while you're online. So you need to have Wi-Fi basically to be able to access it. But in any case, I've found the place where Rinpoche got up to last week, and we'll just see how we go with this week's teaching, and I'll pass it back to him for after the week break we have next week. So if you're looking at the Obermiller translation, we're up to page 65. So basically, we haven't started the section on the history of Buddhism yet. We're still looking at the first book or first section, you might call it, which is a Buddhist education. So he takes quite some time to actually explain what the Dharma is before we actually look at the actual history of it, which is a sensible thing to do, I think. One thing about this translation that I'm going to be using is that it gives translations of the Sanskrit texts or the Tibetan texts that have been translated from Sanskrit. So I'll see how I can do in translating these, but we'll just use the English otherwise. So it starts with, when the ornament of manifest realization, that sounds to me like the Abhisamaya Alamkara, name of a text, is added to these four, those treatises make up Maitriya's 5 teachings. Treatises that follow these include the Exalted Master Asanga's extensive treatises, his 5 works on awakening stages, his concise treatises, the 2 summary works, and Vasubandhu's 8 dissertations. Remembering that Asanga and Vasubandhu were brothers. Very interesting karma. The next title is Asanga's 5 treatises on the stages of awakening. Among Asanga's 5 treatises on awakening stages, the principal treatise is The Main Stages of Awakening, which presents a summary in 17 stages. I'll see if I can find the Sanskrit title. Yeah, Yoga Charya Bhumi. So Bhumi means stages. And yeah, I was right with the other one we mentioned before, is the ornament of manifest realization, Abhisamaya Alamkara. Alamkara means adornment, or like a ornament, a piece of jewelry. Abhisamaya means manifest realization. Abhi means manifest. Abhi in Sanskrit literally means towards. When they translated it into Sanskrit, it means something like manifest, because when you go towards something, you're manifesting. And then samaya here means realization. So yeah, see, Obermiller's text is good in preserving the Sanskrit titles of the text. Despite its shortcomings, which is mainly due to its age, it's still, I understand, it's still a highly respected and pioneering work. So the Yoga Charya Bhumi is the principal treatise, which presents a summary as 17 stages. These 17 are: 1, the stage that has the 5 consciousnesses; 2, the stage of the mental function; 3, 4, and 5, and that of these other 3, examination with analysis, and the others, that is, analysis without examination and with neither examination nor analysis. 6, the stage accompanied by a meditative state. 7, that without it. 8, the state with mind. 9, that which is without mind. 10, the stage with listening. 11, with contemplation. And 12, with meditation. Likewise, 13, 14, and 15, those with the 3 ways. 16, the stage with psychophysical aggregates. And 17, the other stage without the aggregates. Moreover, the 17 topics are presented in the contexts of the support, conduct, and the result. Among these, the support has 3 parts: the stage with the 5 consciousnesses and the stage with the mental function constitute the nature of the support. 3 stages: examination and analysis, analysis without examination, and with neither examination nor analysis, show how the support is entered. 4 stages: settling in evenness, not settling, with mind and without mind, are the circumstances of the support. In relation to engagement, there are 3 stages: listening, contemplation, and meditation. In relation to the result, the temporary results are 3 stages of pious attendance, solitary sages, and bodhisattvas. Pious attendance looks to me like arhats, solitary sages looks to me like pratyeka Buddhas and bodhisattvas. And the ultimate result, the result accompanied by the psychophysical aggregates as a remainder or without this remainder. So it mentions here listening, contemplation, and meditation, which are the 3, what we can call the 3 prajnas, or the 3 levels of prajna. Prajna meaning discriminative wisdom. Generally speaking, there are 2 terms for wisdom in Sanskrit: prajna, discriminating wisdom, and jnana, which is transcendental or primordial wisdom. And generally speaking, we can understand how these 2 terms relate to each other in the sense that prajna is like this discriminating wisdom because it teaches you how to be intelligible and discriminate in a positive sense, distinguishing what from what. So learning all the nuances of the teachings and so forth is discriminating wisdom. And then that leads to what we call jnana, which means transcendental, or sometimes translated as primordial wisdom. So there's 3 levels of prajna: listening, contemplating, and meditating. Generally speaking, it follows that order because listening is the first thing to do. And then what it means by contemplating, in my experience, my understanding, is that it means taking the gist of the teachings. So you've committed yourself to sitting through an 8-week course, or you've committed yourself to listening to an hour or an hour and a half's teaching, and parts of it were interesting, parts of it hopefully were relevant to you, and this very much depends on the teacher, I guess, as well. But the point of contemplation is to distill, the word distill meaning to get the essence of the listening. So you take the parts that are most relevant to you. You don't really worry about the rest. It's good to listen to teachings even if some of it's a bit above your head. You could all probably say that it's even good to teach even if it's a bit over your head. But contemplation in general is just getting onto that sort of wavelength of tuning in and finding how the teachings can be relevant and applicable to you. So that's the second level of prajna. Then the third one is meditation. Meditation is basically synthesizing it, or making yourself one with the actual teaching. This is done through a meditation practice, hopefully a daily practice. So these are the three levels of prajna, the three prajnas, the three levels in which discriminating awareness can lead to transcendental wisdom. Excuse me. Asanga's second treatise of this series, reaching a definite conclusion, a summary, is like a commentary to this first treatise. It presents definitions of the main stages of awakening's words and meanings in relation to such criteria as the four parameters. It contains summary definitions to all stages except for those of the solitary sages, Pratyeka Buddhas. These two treatises present the meaning of the scriptures. Let's see if the titles are in Obermiller. Yeah, reaching a definite conclusion, a summary, seems to be the Bahabhumika Vastu in Sanskrit, which explains the Yogacara doctrine. Generally, there are two doctrines that philosophical viewpoints according to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. One is Madhyamaka and one is Yogacara, also known as mind only, Chittamatram. Generally speaking, it's said that Madhyamaka is a little bit more profound. The mind only school, just to speak very generally, is saying mind only in the sense that maybe it's a little bit more correct to translate it as merely mind, because what it's saying in Tibetan is sem tsam. Sem means mind, tsam means mere. So what it's saying is that all objects, all appearances are merely reflections of your mind. And maybe what the Madhyamaka philosopher would say was, what mind? What is it a reflection of? But yeah, generally speaking, masters such as His Holiness Sakya Rinchen say that the Madhyamaka is slightly more profound than the Yogacara. So this contains summary definitions to all stages except for those of the solitary sages, Pratyeka Buddhas. These two treatises present the meaning of the scriptures. Just look up another title. The third, a summary of the basis, presents how the latter texts are compiled within the three collections. In a brief presentation, he states, Asanga, that they belong to all three collections. Then, in an extensive explanation, he mentions nothing apart from how they belong within the collection of discourses and on monastic discipline, since these 5 treatises on awakening stages form part of the fundamental collection on observed phenomena and are not presented separately in this case. To define the stages of the pious attendants, arhats, a summary of the basis states, what is compiled within the fundamental texts of the collection of observed phenomena includes the 17 stages and the 4 means to gather disciples. So there are a number of texts being mentioned here. One is a Nirnana Samgraha, one is the Vastu Samgraha, one is a Paryaya Samgraha, and one is a Vivarana Samgraha. So next is fourth, a summary of the enumerations, presents synonyms for the words that express the content of treatises, with a specific presentation of synonyms for afflictive emotions and purification. These last two treatises are texts on Buddhist studies. The fifth, a summary of avenues of explanation, presents those four texts' teaching systems. Thus, these five texts are gathered as the five treatises on awakening's stages due to their explanation of the scripture's meaning, Buddhist studies and teaching system. So another noticeable difference between the old school translation and the newer one, we just went through what we call afflictive emotions in the new translation. And here in the older one, it says defiling elements. So these words, when you hear defilements and afflictions in Buddhist terminology, generally they're translating the same term. I'm saying generally. There's a bit of extra explanation beyond the scope of this teaching. But defilements is a little bit out of date. The more standard translation these days is afflictions or afflictive emotions, because the point of them is not that it's a matter of purity so much, it's a matter of having a sense of well-being in our minds. The Tibetan word for, or the closest word Tibetan has for sin, is a threatening or a jeopardizing action, and action as well as voice and mind, action through body, voice, and mind. And it's called a threatening or a jeopardizing action because it threatens or jeopardizes our state of well-being. So the point really in the Buddhist system is afflictive emotions is a very central topic, but definitely, especially if you look at the Sanskrit, the original term, the word is klesha. It comes from the Sanskrit root klish, which means distress. So it's more to do with how it affects our well-being more than anything else. It's not an idea of being purer than others or holier. So if you look at the Sanskrit roots, which you can do with these types of terms quite a bit, and the Tibetan etymologies as well, you can generally make these conclusions. So yeah, defilements is becoming a little bit old-fashioned, as you can see with the more translation such as this, which is already 12 or 13 years old. But they're using the phrase afflictive emotions, which is pretty close to the idea, I think. I think they sort of adopt this for psychological research when they do these sort of mind science things with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and whatnot, and they say disturbing emotions, which is also pretty close. So those are the five texts by a Sangha, and it lists two summary treatises by a Sangha, which is the next title. Of Arya Asanga, yeah. The summary of the Buddhist ways in common is the compendium of observed phenomena, the Abhidharma Samuccaya. Abhidharma kind of means like metaphysics or maybe phenomenology. One way of looking at it, understanding it, is, as I said before, with another title, Abhi, the Sanskrit prefix Abhi, A-B-H-I, means towards or means manifest. Dharma can mean it has 10 definitions. The most relevant for us is two. One, it means the doctrine, the teachings, and the other one, it means phenomena. Its literal meaning is that which holds. Why? Because the teachings hold us through difficult times. Why? What's the connection with Dharma as a term for phenomena? Is that phenomena hold particular characteristics. So that's why we get Dharma comes from the Sanskrit root dur, D-H, and then an R with a dot under it, which is called a vocalic R, which is R as a vowel, dur. So the word Dharma comes from dur, just as the word karma comes from kur, another Sanskrit root. There are about 2,000 Sanskrit roots, and a lot of words you can get some sort of insight into their meaning and their intention of why did Buddha use this particular term. So Abhidharma, so here, one way Rinpoche explained it to me once is that Dharma can mean doctrine. So Abhidharma means that which makes the doctrine manifest. In other words, by studying the Abhidharma, it's the teachings are becoming manifest to you. I'm pretty sure you could also translate it as how phenomena manifest. So sometimes there's ambiguity with these translations, and sometimes I think that ambiguity is deliberate. So this is called the Compendium of Observed Phenomena. Samuchaya means compendium. Abhidharma is observed phenomena. So yeah, these guys have translated as Abhidharma as observed phenomena, manifest objects. Its content is presented under 5 headings: a compendium of characteristics, certainty in relative to the truths, certainty in relation to the teachings, certainty in relation to attainment, and certainty in relation to discussion. The summary of the Great Way is the compendium of the Great Way. That is, according to Obermiller, the Mahayana Samgraha. Mahayana is Great Way, Samgraha is again compendium or summary. This presents a summary of the Great Way in 10 subjects, including subjects of knowledge. Now it goes to Asanga's brother or half-brother, I think it was, Vasubandhu, his 8 dissertations. Vasubandhu's 8 dissertations are as follows. 1, the 30 verses presents all phenomena to be mind only. That in Sanskrit, the name of the text is the Trimshaka Karika Prakarana. Trimshaka means the 30. Karika means verses. Prakarana, not quite sure, sorry. So this is talking about mind only, as I mentioned before. So that's the first one out of the 8. The second one is called the 20. The 20 verses, the Vimshaka Karika Prakarana, Vimshaka, meaning 20, uses reasoning to prove that all phenomena are mind only. So even though this Yogacara or this Semtsam, as I've called it, mind only, so even though this philosophy is said to be slightly less profound than Madhyamaka, it still takes up quite a big portion of the scriptures, which is interesting, isn't it? One way that Rinpoche has explained this to us once is that, generally speaking, if you take the mind-only approach and say that, oh, everything is just my mind, that can help. But if it leads to self-blame or guilt or sort of overemphasizing your own fault, then it's better to go the sort of Madhyamaka way with just saying it's all relative type of thing. So that's how the applicable use is used. And there are debates within the traditions, like in the Sakya tradition, about what the forefathers, the lineage, the historical lineage holders, what philosophy they followed. But Rinpoche's idea of this is more that, well, these were realized beings. They were beyond this sort of philosophical debate. So that's the second. The third, a dissertation on the five aggregates, validates the five aggregates as the basis for all phenomena. That's this Panchaskanda Prakarana. That sounds like an interesting text. So it validates the five aggregates as the basis of all phenomena. So five aggregates, are mentioned in the Heart Sutra, which is the most concise way of explaining emptiness. That's another viewpoint this particular lineage, you could say, takes, is that rather than looking at the in-depth or the more verbose or more having more volumes philosophy, we can just look at what's called the Heart Sutra. Why is it called the Heart Sutra? Because it contains the heart. It contains the essence of what we need to know about emptiness. So it mentions the five aggregates, which is a good translation of the Sanskrit word skanda. The Sanskrit word skanda means aggregate. It also means shoulder. Why? Because shoulder is like a heap. There are two heaps next to your head. And so skandhas are like heaps. They're like the idea that if you put five haystacks together, you end up with one big haystack. So it's a way of explaining the self, or better described as the non-self, Buddha took the liberty to say, anatman as opposed to atman, or the non-soul as opposed to the soul, if you like. The closest teaching Buddha has to a soul, S-O-U-L, is what's called a mind stream, a mental continuum. That's called in Sanskrit samtana. Sam is very literally continuum. Sam is equivalent to English con. Tana is the equivalent to English continuum. So the Panchaskanda, Pancha means five. That comes from the Sanskrit word to spread. Why? Pan means spread. Pancha means five, because when you spread your hand, there's five. Panchaskanda, so that means five aggregates, prakarana. So I know that when my screen goes dim, I've been commenting a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're up to four. Four of the eight of Vasubandhu's 8 dissertations. Fourth is a rational system of exposition. This is called the Vyakya Yukti. Validates that study and teaching. The fifth one is called the accomplishment of actions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Karma Siddhi Prakarana, which validates the actions of the 3 avenues of body, voice, and mind. Those 5 are independent works. And then 6, so the rest are commentaries. As independent works, meaning he is the original author rather than a commentator. So 6 is called a commentary on the ornament of the discourses. That's Sutra Alamkara. 7 is called a commentary on the discourse of interdependent arising. That's the Pratitya Samutpada Sutra. That's a very good Buddhist Sanskrit word to know. Pratitya Samutpada. Pratitya, dependent, Samutpada, arising or origination. Remember, that's the law of all things. It's, as Buddha said, to see me is to see dependent arising. To see dependent arising is to see me. So Buddha is dependent arising. He is the embodiment of the realization of dependent arising. So that's Seventh, and then the last one, is a commentary on distinguishing between the middle and the extremes, the Madhyanta Vibhanga. The three commentaries on others' works validate the 6 transcendent perfections, the paramitas, and other aspects of vast conduct, then the 12 links of interdependent causality, and the 3 characteristics of knowable things, imagined, dependent, and consummate. So it is said. Some state that since this master wrote many works, such as the 10 stages of the awakening discourse, the Dasha Bhumika Sutra, Dasha means 10, Bhumi is stages, levels. Some state that since this master wrote many books such as this, a commentary, such a set of 8 texts cannot be definitely ascertained. They further claim the number of texts related to Maitriya's teachings cannot be delineated as 20. Those who have settled on a definite number believe the 20 to be these: Asanga's 5 treatises on awakening stages, Asanga's 2 summaries of the lesser and greater way, Maitriya's 5 treatises, and Vasubandhu's 8 dissertations. 5, 6, 7 plus 13, so 20. Yep. Next is the treatises that elucidate the conduct of the final turning of the wheel. This treatise includes the 20 vows. A summary of the kinds of treatises. This section has 2 parts. 1, treatises that comment upon the canon itself, and 2, treatises that are personal compositions based on the canon's meaning. Treatises that comment on the canon itself. This category has 5 kinds of treatises. Let's go one by one. Of the 5, 1, extensive commentaries provide detailed commentary to both words and meanings. An example of this is the 50-section Compendium of Monastic Discipline from All Sources, an extensive commentary on the Discourse on Individual Liberation. That's talking about the Pratimoksha Sutra Tika. Pratimoksha means individual liberation. Prati means individual. Moksha means release, like the untying of a knot. It is said that all the Buddha's teachings have the same flavor, which is that of liberation. Buddha wants us all to be free. How do we free ourselves? There are, generally speaking, in Buddhist way of thinking, this is where it's so important to understand about the afflictions and to define them properly, because that is what the Buddha said is really stopping us from being free. So why it's called individual release or liberation is because it's designed for us to focus on where we are losing our grip on keeping things together to avoid our afflictive emotions. So that's why it's individual liberation. The second one, commentaries to the words, explain the text with elaborations on its verbal expression. Examples of this are commentaries to the 2 collections entitled The Composition of Purposeful Speech. So Obermiller mentions the Udana Varga Vivarana. So Udana Varga is purposeful speech. Vivarana means composition. This is the Tibetans' way of looking at what the famous text that we all know about Buddhism called the Dhammapada, most famous in the Theravada tradition. but definitely the Tibetan canon has this as well. It just has it under a different title. Purposeful speech, Udana Varga. 3. Commentaries to difficult points distinguish subjects difficult to understand. Examples of this are the 2 commentaries to the perfection of sublime insight in 8,000 verses. So that's 3. Samcha, he calls it. Perfection of sublime insight looks to me like prajna paramita. It looks like they're translating sublime insight as prajna, or translating prajna as sublime insight. And the 5th one, commentaries to the verbal meaning that present the general meaning of a text speech. Next title is Personal Compositions Based on the Canon's Meaning. This section has 3 parts. Treatises that present the full meaning of one part of the canon, treatises that present teachings that are diffused throughout the canon, and treatises that present the meaning on many parts of the canon. Examples of the first are the Ornament of Manifest Realization and the Root Discourse on Monastic Discipline. An example of the second is Advice for Novice Monks. Examples of the third include the Compendium of Training and A Letter from a Friend. Letter from a Friend is by Nagarjuna. In general, there are many names for commentaries, such as commentary, explanation, full explanation, thesaurus, practical explanation, commentary to difficult points, extensive commentary, compendium of terms, and in-depth study. This classification of treatises is merely a classification of any treatise provided to improve the reader's understanding. I do not consider it to contradict my previous presentation of treatises' characteristics and etymology, which were given in relation to special Buddhist treatises. Before we begin with the next heading, I'd like to take a 2-minute break just to stretch our legs and whatnot, because I'm a firm believer that our attention runs thin after about 3/4 of an hour. And so we'll make this a halfway point, and I'll see you all in about 2 minutes' time. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So the next title is How to Meditate and Cultivate One's Experience Based on That System of Education. This section has 4 parts. 1, the special qualities of the doctrine taught. 2, the special qualities of a teacher's teaching methods. 3, the special qualities of disciples' study methods. And 4, advice for teachers and disciples to accomplish the teaching's aim. So the first title is the doctrine's special qualities. To become learned in all subjects of knowledge, one must study a variety of treatises. The collection of monastic discipline states that one must study even such works as non-Buddhist treatises, and it is said that bodhisattvas in particular should study all disciplines. This is a very common theme in Mahayana, that yes, Dharma is the most important field of study, but we have to be able to be willing to study other disciplines as well. Why? Because they benefit on some level. Nevertheless, to tread the essential path, study and teach the Buddha's doctrine. To identify this doctrine, advice for novice monks radiant discipline, states, I'll just see if there's a Sanskrit for that title. Shramanera Karika. Yeah, Shramanera. So the word for novice monk is Shramanera. Notice it's slightly different from Shramana. So there's a little bit of sort of intricacy in the terms here. So the Sanskrit Shramana, which is found in the famous mantra Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetu Dejantadakado Yawadatu Desanjayonaro Evangori Maha Shramana, the very last word, that means monk or nun in general. Shramana. I think for a nun, it would be Shramana with a long A at the end, or Shramaneri, maybe Shramaneri even. Anyway, for males, it's Shramana, which means monk or ascetic in general. Ascetic, A-S-C-E-T-R-C, meaning one who works hard at liberation, one whose labor is the labor of love, which involves sitting under trees and fasting and doing one's sadhanas and this type of thing, kind of pursuits. So, but this shramana, which means monk or nun in general, can be divided into 2. One is called novice, which is shramanera, which sounds very similar, but it's distinct. Shramanera and Shramanerika for female. And then full ordination is bhikshu and bhikshuni, as you may know. Notice the shram. It's interesting. This shram in Sanskrit there is, I believe, some connection to the word for shaman in other close near cultures near to Tibet, maybe Mongolia. So they all have their etymologies, and the Tibetan ones are quite interesting. All the levels of practitioners in the Tibetan community start with ge, which means virtuous or constructive, kalyana in Sanskrit. So the Tibetan word for community, sangha, is gendun. Ge means virtue. Dun, I think, has a sense of like gathering. Then there's genyen. Genyen is a householder, upasaka or upasika. Genyen, I think that means something like approaching virtue. Then you have novice, which is getsul. This means the mode. Sul means like mode or manner, and Ge again means virtue. So it's all to do with virtue, being together in a community, I think is the point. If virtue sounds like a bit sort of like a too heavily religious word, you could think of it, I think of it sometimes as just being constructive. Virtue could be seen in sort of a bit more maybe secular way as being having constructive thoughts rather than having anxiety thoughts, having constructive thoughts rather than having thoughts of loneliness, this type of thing. Community really means that we, even when we're practicing alone, which many of us practitioners do, we have some kind of connection to the lineage, to the tradition, and so forth, such that as mature students, as mature practitioners, we're never really alone. We feel connected. And then, so that's Genyen. So there's Gendun, Genyen, Getsul, Gelong. So Gejong. Gejong is the general term. Jong just means purify, I think. So purified by virtue. So that's the term Shramanera. So Shamana. And then finally Gelong, which is Bhikshu, fully ordained monk, or Gelong Ma, which is Bhikshuni. And that Gelong, I'm not sure what the long is doing there. But anyway, as you can see, each of the practitioners of the Sangha, from householder to fully ordained, have this idea of being constructive and being constructive together. The whole purpose of the community. So you can understand that with Obermiller's translation, despite it being a very good sort of pioneering translation, that using a translation like church is a bit, shall we say, old-fashioned. So to identify this doctrine, advice for novice monks, radiant discipline, which as I mentioned is the Shamanera Karika, states, the wise recognize the Buddha's speech as that which fully presents the three trainings, has all three seals, and is virtuous in the beginning, the middle, and the end. This refers to the three trainings. This is a very concise verse. This refers to the three trainings in discipline, concentration, and sublime insight. That would be Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna are my guesses for the Sanskrit. It's got it in square brackets, so I'm just guessing the English translations. Discipline means Shila in Sanskrit, Sutrim in Tibetan. It's a common name. So Shila, why Shila? Shila comes from a Sanskrit root. I can't remember the actual, it's not that I can't remember, I don't know if I've learned. The actual root is of Shila means to cool down. Why? Because you can imagine in ancient India that sitting under the shade of a sort of nice tree in the middle of the sweltering heat will cool you down. Similarly, having an awareness of the rules given to monastics, and more importantly, why they're there, is going to have a cooling effect on from the scorching heat of samsara. This is actually how my abbot explained it to us when I got ordained some time ago in Sydney. So it means having a cooling effect. Discipline, moral discipline or self-discipline means having a cooling effect on one's afflictive emotions. Then there's concentration, samadhi. This is like meditative absorption. And then there's sublime insight, which it looks to me like prajna, based on how they've been using that word. Sublime insight, what did I say for prajna? Discriminating wisdom. All have the same idea. So this refers to the three trainings, what is to be accomplished. The three seals are indicative of the canon's view. All phenomena are devoid of a self-entity. all composite phenomena are impermanent, and all contaminated composite things are suffering. So these are the three seals. You may have heard of the four seals. The fourth one is nirvana is peace, or nirvana is beyond extremes. I've seen it as well. That's a fourth one that I'm not sure of the historical basis of why they've added, or when or how or why they added the fourth one. But definitely in Pan-Buddhist, there's Pan-Buddhist comparisons, there's three that we all agree on. So the fourth one, nirvana is peace. If you asked a Theravadan about that, they wouldn't identify that as one of the three seals. So there might be some scholarly work about that, but I haven't come across it yet. The essence of the Buddha's speech is virtuous in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. As I said, if you like constructive more than virtuous, which I do sometimes, that's a valid way of looking at it. The good thing about being a bit sort of nerdy and looking at these various translations and at different times, like actually the Obermiller is still helping me because he's giving some of the Sanskrit titles. But also it's good, sometimes the older translations are a bit more precise in terms of using the right English etymology. But you can definitely get a feel for, from now on, I'm sure if you read a book and you see the word defilements, you might be able to think again and go, okay, when they're saying defilements, they mean something like afflictions. They mean something that bothers you, something that upsets you, this type of thing, rather than it being like a puritanical thing about being clean and pure and holy type of thing. I'll just see if Obermiller says something about virtuous. Doesn't seem to. The Individual Liberation Discourse, which looks like Pratimoksha Sutra, states, these words for the Buddha's teaching span: do not commit harmful acts of any kind, practice perfect virtue, and thoroughly tame your mind. This is a good summary of what the Buddha taught. Do not commit harm, practice virtue, be constructive, and thoroughly tame your mind. How do we tame our minds? Through study, contemplation, and meditation. If we find other ways to tame our mind, all the better. It is said in the discourses, the sacred teachings are virtuous in the beginning, virtuous in the middle, and virtuous at the end. They are sublime in word and meaning, unique, perfect, pure, and completely refined. Asanga and others explain virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end as study, contemplation, and wisdom. This is interesting, isn't it? Because I mentioned there's an order. Some say that it refers to the introduction found at the beginning of a discourse. Discourse here usually means sutra. The main part of the discourse in the middle, and the words of rejoicing at the end. Master Kalyana Deva, Gewe La in Tibetan maybe. Kalyana means virtue in Sanskrit, right? Deva means divine. Divine virtue. The Master Kalyana Deva explains it as the verses of homage at the beginning of a treatise, the body of the treatise is in the middle, and the dedication at the close. On this subject, according to the rational system of exposition, beginning, middle, and end refer to the accumulations of ethical conduct, meditative states, and sublime insight, which are virtuous because they never decline. That's Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, right? Sublime meaning refers to the magnificent subject, which is irrefutable. Sublime words refers to the magnificent expression, which leads to an understanding of the subject. It is unique in that it shares nothing in common with other doctrines. It is perfect because it constitutes the antidote to every emotional affliction. Completely pure refers to liberation in the essence of being, itself due to liberation from one's personal stage of emotional afflictions. Refined refers to liberation of one's stream of being. See, stream of being. This is probably trying to translate that term I mentioned, mind stream or mental continuum. Stream of being is a bit looser. It definitely is talking about mind stream, like in the sense that, just pause there, in the sense that there's an analogy given in the teachings about a stream. So if you look at a river or a creek or a stream, generally speaking, we give that a name. We give that a name, river such and such. But if you look at it closely, it's always moving. There's always some sort of continuation. So it's this continuation that it's on the basis of the understanding this continuation that we can accept the idea of rebirth and the idea of karma. And it's, as I said, it's the closest thing that Buddhism has to a soul, S-O-U-L, soul. As we know, Buddha was pretty precise and pretty adamant that he would use the word anatman, meaning non-soul. He would, and it sounds a bit awkward, but he decided to go with that awkwardness rather than saying, bless your soul or purify your soul or something like that. He was quite specific about that, which was probably for good reason. Because if we think of, reincarnation and so forth, we think, oh, there must be something that transfers from one life to the next. The best we can look at it is to use this precise language and say it's some sort of a continuation. There's a saying to the effect of, you're not the same nor different from your past lives. So there's just some sort of continuation that's happening. Refined refers to the liberation of one's stream of being due to the abandonment of other stages' latent emotional afflictions. The wise recognize that which possesses all these qualities as the sacred teachings. In short, the Buddha's doctrine, the sacred teachings, is presented according to two systems. First, the common vehicle's general system holds that it is contained in the discourses of the Four Noble Truths. It tames emotional afflictions, and it does not contradict the nature of dependent origination. Second, the Great Ways system was presented above in a quote from the highest continuity, or further, the highest continuity. That looks like Uttara Tantra to me. I've sort of lost where we are with the Obermiller. Never mind. Uttara Tantra is, generally speaking, teaching on Buddha nature. What's in Sanskrit called Buddha Gotra. Gotra meaning nature or something like race or family. Also known as the Tathagata Garbha, the womb of the Tathagata. Tathagata is one of the 80 or so words for Buddha. It's really quite amazing. There's a very old work in Tibetan called its Sanskrit title is the Mahavyutpati, and it's like a glossary or a big sort of dictionary or maybe encyclopedia. And it has all the equivalents of the, rather than avoid this sort of confusion that you can see a little bit of in looking at these English texts. What they did in the olden days in Tibet, they had a king would be the benefactor and preside over many different scholars and practitioners of both India and Tibet, and deciding, right, we need to develop this word for this term, and that's, if you don't use that, then your translation is not valid. So they standardized and they made equivalents of Tibetan terms for all the different Sanskrit words, which, as I hope you can see from my understanding, have often quite meaningful and deep etymologies and so forth. So what the way this Mahavyutpati, this text, is divided, is not alphabetical order like we might expect some dictionaries to have these days, but it starts with just different topics. And the first, as you might imagine, is words for the Buddha. And as I said, there are about 80 of them. The most well-known is Buddha. It's become an English word, as English is well known for and prides itself on being able to absorb new terms. Literally, it means awakened one. Tathagata is a common one, and it looks like another one that might not be translated, because when you do translate it, it comes out a bit clumsy. It comes out as something like thus gone one. Tata means in this manner, or thus. Gata means go. But there's a ambiguity, and I think it might be a deliberate ambiguity, because it could be tata gata or it could be tata agata. It could be either. Gata means to go, agata means to come. So what it's saying is, it's pointing to this idea that Buddha himself didn't invent Buddhism. He discovered the way things are, and he had the common sense and insight to be able to share this with others. Is the reality that Buddha discovered any different from the reality of a previous Buddha or a future Buddha? No. So this is the sort of cosmological framework in which this idea of Tathagata must be understood. It's someone who comes and goes in the same manner as the past and future Buddhas, which is thus gone one. Yeah, that's as close as we can get in English. But Tathagata is a nice word. So, after that digression, the ornament of the discourses, which looks like Sutra Alamkara. Alamkara means, again, adornment. Discourses is Sutra. Oh, here we go. I think I'm back. Back with the other translation. Let's read the English. The cause of faith, joy and intellect, it is virtuous. It benefits both self and others and is easily memorized. It possesses 4 positive qualities and teaches pure conduct. It shares nothing in common with other approaches. It perfects the elimination of the 3 realms' emotional afflictions, and being pure in essence, it is free from defilements. There could be another word that the defilements is translating, by the way, so don't take that too literally, that I'm saying that defilements is always wrong. I think it's in Sanskrit asrava. I don't recall the Tibetan offhand. It is pure conduct endowed with the 4-fold positive qualities. Now, it's good to know, being a Buddhist, sometimes I find explaining these things to people who are less beginners and a bit more experienced practitioners, is that it's if a person is genuinely philosophically wondering what's the difference really between Buddhism and Hinduism, because we share a lot of terms. We do, especially in the Tibetan tradition, we do what's called yidam, or deity practices, which, if we look into the Sanskrit, is also what the Hindus do, because the Sanskrit or one of the terms for Sanskrit terms for yidam or deity practice is Ishta Devata. Ishta means favorite, Devata means divinity. So of all the different Buddhist deities that we see on tankas and in statues and so forth, we have our chosen or our favorite divinity, and so so much of the vocabulary is the same, even to the extent that, for example, there's what's called in scholarly Western Buddhism, we call it, since about the 1950s, Edgerton started calling it the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit. And he published a dictionary and a grammar and a reader of this particular dialect of Sanskrit. And it's a volume that's about as big as a general Sanskrit dictionary, such as Monia Williams. But he mentions in the introduction that a word such as nirvana he hasn't even put into the Buddhist dictionary, which might seem a bit surprising. But he explains that the general understanding of this term doesn't really differ too much between the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions. So, if even our definition of the end goal of Buddhism, and as some schools in Hinduism would have you, and particularly as I've noticed with some well-educated Indians who are doctors and so forth, and but who treat Buddhism as a branch of Hinduism with its merits. Generally speaking, these three seals that we just went through are what differentiates Buddhism from other systems. I'm saying generally because there's even more nuance to it than that. I might read them again if I can. Three seals, wasn't it? Yeah. The three seals are indicative of the canon's view. All phenomena are devoid of a self-entity, all composite phenomena are impermanent, and all contaminated composites are suffering. So devoid of self-entity, impermanence, and suffering. Anatman, anicca, and dukkha. So generally speaking, that's what separates Buddha Dharma from other Dharma. Let's go back to the text for a bit more. Regarding the extraordinary great way, it is said, where one meditates fully, actually, sorry, I'm not sure if I finished the last verse. So, being pure in essence, it is free from defilements. It is pure conduct endowed with fourfold positive qualities. Okay. That's from the Ornament of Discourses, Sutra Alamkara. Regarding the extraordinary great way, it is said, where one meditates fully on the inseparability of emptiness and compassion, there is present the doctrine of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the spiritual community. So here, spiritual community is a good way of thinking of Sangha. Works a bit better than church. Yeah, so sorry, just to go back to the line of thought, the train of thought I was on before. Yeah, so if someone has a genuine sort of philosophical question of what makes Buddhism distinct from other Indian traditions, it's generally speaking those three seals that is the best answer to that question. As we know, it's these days more important to focus on what we have in common rather than what distinguishes us. Like, yeah, I remember the slogan for one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's tours in Australia was "We're all the same." I don't think this is saying that diversity is bad. I think things like multiculturalism, especially in a place like Australia, are great to celebrate. I don't think that's what his intention was. I think these days, like it's good to be educated about your own tradition, and this can help explain yourself to people who might not understand so much and might have wrong views about what we're doing. Like I remember I do a fair bit of interfaith type of gathering stuff, and some faces have become quite familiar. And I remember this Indian guy who I think we were generally having a chat about meditation or something, and we were at one of these interfaith events. But as soon as I mentioned the Sanskrit word for yidam practice, which is ishtadevata, which if I had said yidam, or if I had said, I practice a deity, he might have not really understood. But as soon as I said ishtadevata, something clicked and his face brightened up. And he said, "Oh, that's the same as we do." So, being informed and learning some of the language can definitely go a long way. The more confidence we have is about our tradition is not just for our own practice, but by others seeing small steps of transformation that we are experiencing, maybe evolving through our practice and redefining our lives somewhat, and maybe editing or proofreading the stories of our life. That sort of inspiration can be very meaningful for ourselves and others. Accordingly, back to the text, that which possesses the essence of emptiness and compassion is referred to as the Buddha's doctrine. See, yeah, emptiness and compassion. Compassion, I think we could agree, everyone could agree to. Emptiness is a little bit more subtle. This doctrine, consisting of scripture or special treatises, falls under the two categories of word and meaning. I think if someone was to ask you about emptiness, I think the best way to explain it would be pratitya samutpada, which is dependent origination. That's a lot more sort of substantial and less susceptible to falling into nihilism or misunderstanding, saying it's dependently originated rather than saying it's empty. But because emptiness is quite a subtle term that has a lot of explaining to do, and that is meant to be understood as a creative thing rather than a nihilistic thing. It's meant to encourage us to be, if we have a good understanding of shunyata, emptiness, it means that we have the ability to creatively change ourselves. Creatively change ourselves into what? Into the deity if we're doing yidam practice. Yes, go.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering, given your description of the meanings of the relationship between Tibetan Sanskrit and the English best equivalents, is the word emptiness the best equivalent term?
Oh, that's a good question. For the Sanskrit and the Tibetan, yes. But an interesting point is that when the Tibetans first looked at it, the Sanskrit is shunyata. Shunya is empty, ta is ness. So it's perfect. Tibetan is tongpa ni. Tongpa is empty, ni is ness. So it's perfect. But having said that, we're on the same level of thought, is that they were originally going to translate it as ye jam. Ye means like yeshe. Ye means primordial. Jam means like infinity, timeless infinity, something like that. Vast infinity, something like that. So that has like a nuance of it that the word emptiness doesn't. But for some reason they stuck with the letter. Yeah. Accordingly, that which possesses the essence of emptiness and compassion is referred to as the Buddha's doctrine. Yep. This doctrine, consisting of scripture or special treatises, falls under the two categories of words and meaning. The Ornament of Discourses states, like a foul-smelling medicine which proves sweet when tasted, so too the doctrine dwells in two categories to be known as words and meaning. So the Buddha's teaching is often compared to being a medicine. We have to learn to take the medicine. We may need to make sure it's the right medicine, that it's going to do the job that and this type of thing, that we receive it from a qualified teacher, and so forth, and we treat our Dharma brothers, sisters, and friends as fellow patients, if you like. There's a whole list that explains the triple gem in terms of medicine. So the Buddha is the doctor, the Dharma is the medicine, and the Sangha is the medical assistants that help you, but vice versa as well. So just like many medicines can be bitter when tasted, or so too the Buddha Dharma may come across as tough love sometimes, and maybe a little bit bitter to the taste at first, but we know it's going to do the job. We know that for example, with our sitting practice, we know that the discomfort, and that type of thing while we're sitting, we know that by sitting still, we are doing some sort of purification. Magnificent meaning refers to the doctrine's special characteristics, such as pure conduct and being endowed with 4 positive qualities. Regarding magnificent words, the Ornament of Discourses states, the doctrine and its explanations, consistent with the ways of spiritual development, is pleasant, renowned, reasonable, and conducive to deliverance from the wheel of life. In brief, these are Sublime Bodhisattva's magnificent words. Moreover, the concise explanation states, the body of the discourses has 2 aspects, word and meaning. The words should be viewed as the subjects, meaning that which is contained in them. In brief, both must be understood. Likewise, Dhammottara's short treatise states, a dissertation's body contains 2 aspects, language and reasoning and meaning. Therefore, the Buddha spoke the teachings that are articulated, compilers collected it, accomplished scholars elucidated it, and translators and pundits, sublime individuals, translated it. Remember, I mentioned the word for 5 in Sanskrit, pancha, comes from pan, meaning to stretch. When you stretch your hand, there are 5 fingers. Just about any language from all the way from Japan in the east to the islands of Great Britain in the west, I think just about all of the languages around there work on base 10, meaning simply because we have 10 fingers to count with. Why is a pandit or a pandita called a pandita? Because traditionally speaking, there are 5 sciences, 5 fields of knowledge. I don't think I can remember them offhand. One of them is Dharma. This doctrine spans the tantras, containing the transmissions and pith instructions of spiritual masters' lineages, the discourses, the scriptures or treatises, and the collections of discourses, observed phenomena, and monastic discipline. Each of these must explain the teachings according to its respective sources. Starting a new section. Do you reckon we should go on for an extra 5 minutes or so? Yeah. So the next section at number 2 is called the special qualities of the master's teaching methods. Okay. The teacher's qualifications. Each text gives a different account of a teacher's varied qualifications. Advice for novice monks in 300 verses states, one who keeps the vows, knows the formal procedures of monastic discipline, is caring towards the sick, is surrounded by pure individuals, strives to be of spiritual and material aid, and gives timely counsel, is acclaimed to be a spiritual master, i.e. a guru or a lama. The Guru and Lama, that's a good example of how the Tibetans translated a Sanskrit word. What's interesting about this one is they didn't look at the literal etymology. Guru in Sanskrit generally means anything that is heavy. It's actually related, cognate to the English word grave or gravity. So what it means is one who is heavily laden with qualities of loving kindness towards all sentient beings, particularly his or her students. So when the Tibetans decided to translate that, they didn't look at a literal term, or they didn't look for a term with the same literal etymology, but what they gave it was Lama, which means something like, there's two ways to interpret it. Lama, La can mean spiritual, Ma can mean mother, so it can mean spiritual mother in the sense that it is someone who cares for your spiritual growth. Lama can also mean, La can mean higher, Ma can mean not, so it means that no one is higher than one's teacher. So it's similar to the similar to the Western sort of mystical tradition saying one's superior. Master Nagarjuna, notice the pronouncing, it's not Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna. Naga means serpents, sort of like a mythical being, and Arjuna has a slightly obscure meaning. Know this summary of spiritual mantis qualifications. They are imbued with contentment, compassion, and ethical conduct, and they have sublime insight cleansed of afflictive emotions. When you rely on such teachings, you will know them. Be respectful. Shantideva, the famous author of Bodhisattva's Way of Life, says, the ever virtuous mentor is an expert on the great way's meaning. Chandragomi says, accept the spiritual master who is wise, capable, and observe the vows. Further, the ornament of the discourses states, rely on the spiritual mentor who is disciplined, serene, calm, possesses exceptional qualities, is diligent, is wealthy in scriptural transmissions, has realized the nature of reality, is articulate, embodies loving kindness, and is never discouraged. As stated here, spiritual mentors should be disciplined, possessing ethical conduct, serene, possessing meditative concentration, calm, possessing sublime insight that has calmed the afflictive emotions, exceptional in that their outstanding qualities distinguish them from others, diligent, never complacent when it comes to aiding others, wealthy in scriptural transmissions, gained through a wide-ranging education, fully realized regarding the absolute nature of phenomena, verbally articulate, loving, uninterested in material gain, and never discouraged when it comes to teaching the doctrine. Spiritual mentors should have these 10 qualities. Just got another paragraph to go. Thus, it quotes some scripture, it doesn't say which one. Recognized as a great holy individual, the bodhisattva who has received many teachings, has perceived the truth, is articulate, is kind, and never becomes discouraged. Thus, 5 qualities are attributed to the teacher. Extensive education, 1. The quality, whoops, I pressed the wrong button. Move to the next chapter rather than just going down. Okay, thus 5 qualities are attributed to the teacher. Extensive education, the quality of scriptural transmission. Perception of the truth, the quality of realization. Verbal eloquence. kindness, paying no attachment to material gain, and lack of discouragement, not complacent in attitude and conduct. It's a pretty big task, isn't it? Further, a bodhisattva who has wide learning, resolves doubts, is worthy of being accepted, and teaches the nature of reality in two aspects, is known as a magnificent teacher. In this example, the bodhisattva is characterized as possessing a wide-ranging education gained through extensive study, having knowledge that resolves disciples' doubts, virtuous in body, speech, and mind, and thus worthy of being accepted as a spiritual master, and able to teach the respective natures of the afflictive emotions and the state of complete purification. These qualities are generally the qualities of the exalted persons or saints, and thus it is difficult to possess them all. He's at least admitting to that. These three aspects, however, are indispensable: expert knowledge, a loving attitude, and forbearance in practical application. That looks like a good place to stop. So I'll highlight that and let Rinpoche know. Did I do something bad? Let Rinpoche know for next teaching session. So this translation seems to work quite well. Obviously, my Tibetan is not as fluent as Rinpoche, so I can't just teach straight from the Tibetan as he's been doing it. Please give me a minute. I just need to work out how to highlight. Okay, I'll work that out after we dedicate the merits. So thank you all for your attention. As I mentioned in the beginning, next week there will be no class because we'll be His Holiness will be visiting, and he'll be in the middle of doing a 3-day Vajrakalaya long puja as a special way of making this a new temple, an authentic place to practice and study the Dharma. So thanks everyone for your attention, and we'll dedicate the merits, which is on page 10 of the textbook. By this merit may we overcome the defilements and gain omniscience. May I liberate all beings from the ocean of birth, old age, sickness, death, hearing the Mahayana teachings. Whatever merit I have accrued, may all winds become stateless vessels to hold the Mahayana teachings. Courageous Manju, she knew all things, and Samanta Bhadradi likewise, following all of their examples. I shall dedicate all these merits. May the excellent bodhicitta take birth where it has not yet done so. Where it has been born, may it increase freely without degeneration. Thanks, everyone.